Welcome to the Archive Room podcast.
The Nation Station, Manx Radio.
Fastamai, I'm Judith Lay, and I'm very pleased to find you waiting for me at the door to the Archive Room, the place where we keep stories of island life in years gone by, told by the people who were there. So come on in, sit down and make yourself comfortable, and let's listen to this week's selection. Shock, sadness and real suffering as young children could have overwhelmed Ellen O'Brien and Inkerman Faragher. But as we're going to hear in their conversations with David Callister, it most certainly did not. Ellen O'Brien had a variety of jobs and also raised a family of 7 children, whilst Inkerman Faragher spent 40 years active in the world of politics. Different in very many ways, there's also a great deal that unites these two. Both Manx-born around the same time, Ellen O'Brien in 1922 and Inkerman Faragher in 1924, and there's even a story about each of their names.
Now, where does Inkerman come from then?
Inkerman is actually from the Crimean War, and the only thing I know about it is the fact that during that particular time there was an officer from the Crimean War, from the Battle of Inkerman in actual fact, who was down at Santon visiting people, and my people originated from Santon, and one of them gave birth to a child who was a boy, and he asked if the child could be named Inkerman, and Inkerman was placed on it, and it's been there in parts of the family on and off. My father was Inkerman, and I have a nephew whose second name is Inkerman.
So that's Inkerman Faragher, known affectionately as Inky. But what about Ellen O'Brien?
Was Ellen a common name for a girl when you were born?
Yes, it was. Ellen Van, but it was spelled E-N, not A-N.
And then you became Cissy. When did you become Cissy?
God knows. I don't know. I think it was just family giving their own nicknames.
Where did you go to school then?
Hanover Street. And then when Mother died, we were put in a children's home, and I went to Muddy's Road School.
How old were you when your mother died?
10, on my 10th birthday. Died of TB.
That must have been a terrible shock to you at 10.
It was. I came home from school. I said, she shouldn't have done that. Broke my heart, that.
Yeah.
You see, 10 in them days, you were 10. If you're 10 these days, you're 20. Got a head on you like a 20-year-old. Yeah, broke my heart, that.
Yeah. You had brothers and sisters, so some of you had to go in the children's home then?
Yes. My sister older than me and my brother younger than me. We went in the children's home. But the other two, Tommy and Annie, were too old to go in.
And that's their biggest shared experience. Both Cissy O'Brien and Inkerman Faragher grew up in the children's home in Douglas. But life was never easy for Inkerman, even from his birth.
You had a hard time as a child, didn't you, even from birth?
Yes, that's correct. When I was born, it was by pure accident that the person that was there at the birth spotted that there was something wrong with my right leg and my foot. And it turned out that I actually had a club foot. I don't know the proper name for it. And it meant that my foot was virtually turned round. And I can remember being in and out of hospital, Nobles Hospital, as a youngster. When I was about 5 to 6, they sent me over to Heswell Children's Hospital on the Merseyside, and I was operated on there. And I was there for about 7 months. I went to, my first lot of schooling was there. And what it has actually left me with is, in actual fact, my right leg is that much shorter, and my right foot is actually smaller. I had to wear calipers, splints, and plaster of Paris and everything like that, and that went on for many, many years. And in actual fact, the time I was in the children's home and that, I used to have it treated every night. It had to be massaged in warm olive oil, then it was wrapped in cotton wool, and then it was placed into an aluminium splint and had to be bandaged up. And this was an occurrence that happened for me every night of the year until I was near enough 16. And in between that time, I used to have to go to the hospital too from the children's home for exercising and all this sort of thing.
But it didn't stop you playing games later then? I mean, you'd recovered pretty well.
It didn't even stop me then when I had these things on. As you're probably aware, during my young days like that, we used to play in Tyndall Street. I could take part in the majority of games that they ever played. I always made sure of that, because I've always made it a part of life, the fact that no way would I ever let it control me. And my greatest hobby of the whole lot is ballroom dancing. That there, in actual fact, come from the fact of going to the Nobles Hospital, because they told me exercise was the most important thing. And it was suggested to me I'd never been on a dance floor in my life at that time. And the first place I ever went to, in actual fact, was the Myrtle Hall, St Mary's.
Right.
And I can remember the first dance I ever danced. And I can also say I know who the individual was. And the first dance I ever danced, actually, was the Palliglide. And the first lady I ever danced with was the late Edie Crompton.
Oh, I remember Edie, of course.
That was the first person that I was ever on a dance floor with.
The worst thing that happened to you when you were growing up, of course, was when you lost your mother and father within a short period.
I was about 12 at the time, and I lost my mother on the 23rd of February, and I lost my father on the 7th of March. That was a fortnight. Had quite an impact, actually.
So that's when you were put to the children's home.
We were put to the children's home.
That was up just past the grandstand, wasn't
That's
it, on
right.
the other side?
That's right.
Just past the Borough Cemetery.
That's correct, yeah.
What do you remember of those days then in the children's home?
I remember a lot about it in actual fact. The first thing about it was the fact that the family, we were split up, see, the boys and the girls. The girls went over to what was called the girls' house, and that's the house which is over on the Greenfield roadside, and the boys were in the main building. So that made a difference too. We were separated basically, and the basic time we ever seen each other was breakfast time, because they used to come over to the main house, and meal times. Other than that, we had no connection whatsoever. But the children's home, I think basically I have a lot to thank them for. They sorted me out in my mind in respect to the suddenness of what had actually happened and the fact of going there. Life was strict to a degree. We had a number, we all had numbers, and I never forget mine. 33 was my number, and that was on the lockers, it was on everything you had, and that was it. And the routine basically at that time, you'd be up about 7 o'clock to 7:30. You'd had to get washed, dressed and everything like that. You'd go in for breakfast.
In a big dining room with big wooden tables. You had porridge. It was that thick. You could slice it, and a slice of toast.
And then you come out and you were inspected. And we would go to Murray's Road School, and we used to walk down. We used to be all lined up and walk down with one of the staff with us. We'd walk down to Murray's Road School. At 12 o'clock, they'd be there waiting, and we'd walk back to the children's home, have something to eat. Then we'd walk back to Murray's Road again. At night time, coming out of school, we'd walk back to the children's home.
Yeah.
Oh, God, I remember Inky very well. Yes, I still see him now.
You're a tough generation, aren't you?
Oh, God, yes, we were. We were made tough in the children's home.
We would be in bed by 8 o'clock at the latest, and between the time of after having tea, there would be a playroom there. You'd play there. Then one of the staff would come, and you'd have to start getting bathed now, in age groups and everything like that.
They looked after you as best they could.
They looked after us. They looked after us and fed us well and clean clothes and everything, but there was no affection. I missed it. I missed them. Somebody that would hear me prayers at night, like my mother used to, and then took me in. That's what I really missed that. If you fell and cut your knee, well, you got on with it. Nobody cuddled you or said, oh, come on, you'll get better soon. There was no affection whatsoever.
No.
They were very cold. So we made pals of each other.
Your father would be able to visit you, would he?
Oh, yes, he visited us once a month. We used to have a concert every year, and all the kids went in it. And they had us up in the gym where there was a big stage, and they painted an old-fashioned fireplace, and two of the kids were sitting in rocking chairs each side. And I was standing there, and I was singing, just a song at twilight. And my father was sitting in the front row crying his eyes out. Yeah.
Just a song at twilight, when the lights are low, and the flickering shadows softly come and go. Though the heart be weary, sad the day and long, still to us at twilight comes love's old song, comes love's old sweet song.
Inkerman Faragher remembers being in that same gym at Christmas, but his memories are very different.
In Glencrutchy Road on Christmas Day, we used to use the gym, and all the children and the staff would assemble on the Christmas day, and we'd have games and all this. Fantastic time. Food was fantastic. But in my mind, it was always spoiled the following morning, because the following morning, when we'd line up for to go into breakfast, one of the women would come out and she'd have a huge big white enamel jug full of Epsom salts. And in the other hand would be another small jug of licorice powder mixture, and you had to have one or the other, and there was no getting out of it whatsoever. But now, as time goes on, you realise why these things are done for you, you know. Summertime was quite good. If the weather was good, we used to always go down to the shore in the afternoon, regimental, marching, khaki shirts and khaki shorts. Yeah, through this, we'd all march down onto the opposite arches, onto the promenade and onto the shore, and we'd be there for a couple of hours, and then we'd walk back. And the one thing I really do remember on this was the fact that one day we were coming back up, and we got just to the arches, and the heavens opened up, and on this particular day we had the matron of the home with us, Mrs. Morton, good scout in actual fact, you know. The one thing I always remember about her is that she had a beautiful voice, a beautiful contralto voice. And this day, while we stood out of the rain, she sang South of the Border. And it's a tune, any time I ever hear it, it was so beautifully sung.
South of the border, down Mexico way, that's where they fell in love when stars above came out to play. Was a picture in old Spanish lace, just for a tender while he kissed the smile upon her face, for it was fiesta and they were so gay, south of the border, Mexico way. Then she sighed as she whispered mañana, never dreaming that they were parting. And he lied as he whispered mañana, for that tomorrow never came. South of the border, he rode back one day.
In the archive room this week, we're eavesdropping on David Callister's conversations with Inkerman Faragher and Cissy O'Brien, who both spent most of their childhood in the children's home in Douglas in the late 1920s. But surprising as it might seem, it was there that Cissy got a glimpse into the world of filmmaking. When the producer of George Formby's classic No Limits needed a group of young extras for one scene, the children's home was the first place he looked.
There were half a dozen of us picked, and we had to go down and sit on the wall at the bottom of the children's home. And when the fella waved his flag, we had to get off the wall and walk across to the grandstand. They'd put a bit of a grandstand up, you know. Mm-hmm. And in the film, it looked as though George Formby was going at the speed, but he wasn't. He come from Governor's Bridge, just a normal speed, and it looked as though he was going like 60 miles an hour, and he could have run into us.
Right. You'd be enjoying that then?
Oh, we did. We had great fun.
Did you get any money for it?
I think it was 2 shillings, and it felt that big in my hand, you know, that 2 shillings. I thought, oh, it was like winning the lottery.
Because you wouldn't be used to having money as kids.
Oh, we never got any money, no.
No. Did you get to meet George Formby then?
Yes, oh God, yes.
Yeah?
He was marvellous to us. We weren't allowed to go and sit on the bike or anything like that.
No. What about Florence Desmond?
Oh God, he hated her. She was shifting us away. Go away from me, go away, you orphans. Get these orphans away from me. And I went up to, being very cheeky. I said, I'm not an orphan. My daddy's still alive. And I was going to kick her, but I didn't.
She didn't get on with George Formby, did she?
Oh, they were bitter enemies. And I don't know how you couldn't get on with George Formby. Very easy-going man.
She didn't think he was very bright,
He was all right, you couldn't kid him.
Both Cissy and Inkerman spoke highly of their time at Murray's Road School and head teacher Mr. Corris. But it was another teacher who began what became Inky's lifelong interest in politics.
The greatest privilege I think I had at Murray's Road School was the fact of being taught by the late Peter Hislop. Peter Hislop was a teacher in a mould on his own, one, and I believe doesn't exist today. And I believe that was probably the first time in the distance of politics come into my mind, because what he used to do, apart from reading, he could read a story, it was so fantastic. You could sit there and you could actually see the whole issue stretched out before you. Yeah. But he had one other issue. He used to pick a subject up and we'd discuss it. And then he'd split the class, half a dozen then, half a dozen the other side, and to debate it.
Right.
And he would be the chairman. And I found it very, very interesting. And I believe, honestly do believe, that was the real start of being involved
in political thought.
Political thought, yes.
16 was the age limit in the children's home.
Well, they sent you into private service. They found you the job and you went into private service.
And what was your job?
I went to work for a vicar in Bolton, St Simon and Jude's Church. Church in the morning and at night. Yeah. I felt more comfortable. There was a lady who used to come in and do the heavy work, you know, and she used to cook.
Did you do the cleaning? And
yes, the cleaning, washing the wooden walls down in the fronts and God knows what. I'd have stayed there, but I got homesick for the sea. Did miss it because it's in town, you know.
Yeah, you get homesick. You decide to come back home? Yeah.
Oh, yes, yeah.
We wouldn't have a job to go to, did you?
Oh, I soon got one at the Central Hotel. And then shortly after the war broke out, 1939, and the army took the hotel over. They had the offices there, and that's where I was.
Well, you joined the Wrens, though, did you?
Yes, and then they changed it all over again, you know, the hotel. And we were expected to make the beds and wait on in the dining room. We couldn't cope with it. It was far too much. So I left there and went down to see a friend of mine, Norma Birch. Norma was stationed up in St George. So I asked her what it was all about, but Norma was in the proper Wrens, you see. So I thought, I'll have a go at that. So I went down to the village and I had to see Mrs. Tovey. So she said, come in. She said, and I'll explain what it is. So it was her that told me that we were in the Wrens, but not the proper Wrens. Once we put our foot in the village, we were in the Navy. But we didn't have a proper uniform. We had a skirt and a jacket, but the jacket had black buttons on it, not the brass ones.
And what was your daily routine there, then?
We should have to be in for 7 o'clock.
So where did you stay? You were not staying in?
Oh, no, I lived in Fort Street. And, but, you know, like the usual breakfast and, you know.
But what were you doing in the daytime?
Cleaning and setting up the table, you know, for the next meal. And
so you're still doing domestic work?
Oh, yes, yeah.
Well, there was a Valkyrie where Manx Radio now is, wasn't there? I mean, I think that was built for radar work. Did you ever get there? We
wanted to see us being nosy. So they said, well, when is your day off? They don't talk like that. They said, well, when you're on leave, come up. So anyway, the 2 or 3 of us went up and, the carry on we had to try and get in to explain. So anyway, they let us in and we were walking round and it was something you had to be trained for, you know. You see little blips on a screen and that's a plane and that's... I couldn't have coped. But the notice they had on the wall, females using these machines can be made infertile. And I had 7 children. Didn't do nothing for me, did it?
So what happened to Inkerman Faragher when he too reached the age of 16?
When I left the children's home, I went to live with my grandmother and I started to work at Collinson's Cafe, training as a baker and confectioner. I got 10 bob a week and the conditions were I had to give my grandmother 7 and 6 a week. So that meant I had half a crown, which I think is 12.5 pence today. Right. I had to survive on that completely and totally. To survive on that. I did.
When the Second World War came along, Inky joined the Merchant Navy. His service took him to India, South Africa, the Suez Canal Zone, Sierra Leone and New York, among other destinations. In North Africa, his ship was shelled. The shell went right through the vessel from one side to the other without exploding.
Let's just pause Inkerman's Merchant Navy adventures for a moment whilst we catch up on Cissy's naval experiences as the war was coming to an end.
But when you were at Valkyrie then, you were telling me about making a trip to the Tower of Refuge.
They were telling that the war was going to finish, and then it wasn't, then it was, then it wasn't. So we got a bit fed up with it. And the fellas said, oh, to hell with this. Tell you what, we'll have a party of our own, because all Douglas was going mad because the war was finishing. So he said, we'll have a party of our own, kid, come on. He owned a boat, like a rowing boat, and he got some drink. And he said, come on, you lot. There was 4 of us, women that were tidying up and cleaning. These other 4 fellas, they said, we'll have a party. So about 5 o'clock or something. Come on, we're finished now. So we went down, got on this rowing boat, and we went out to the Tower of Refuge. But trying to get the boat up against the rocks was like trying to climb Mount Everest. It was rock. Eventually we got off, and we were having sandwiches and drink. And then the tide started to come in. So he said, oh, we'll have to make a move. And one of the fellas said, you give us what we want or you'll swim home. And not one of us got wet.
This takes you then really to the end of the war period.
Yes,
so
yeah.
you're out of the Wrens.
Yeah.
You're a civvy again.
Yeah.
So what did you do next?
Well, I used to work for the Freemasons. I worked for the Freemasons about 23 years.
Yeah, because you were having a family as well at this time.
Yeah. They were very good. But when we first went to work for them, the Tyler, he's like housekeeper that sees that the meals are all right and that. Whatever you hear at the tables, you do not repeat. They used to disappoint us, because when we went to serve them, they shut up.
So you never heard anything at the
no,
table?
No, not a thing. But they were great lot. They were real gentlemen. They were a pleasure to work for.
And then you said you had quite a number of children yourself.
Yeah. Well, we couldn't afford a telly.
What other happy memories have you got of this long life then, would you say?
Having the children. But unfortunately, I lost one boy. He was 15 and he was killed on a motorbike. So the biggest sadness in my life. Yeah. But all the others are all right. They're good kids.
It was Michael that rang me up.
I know,
and
I'll
said,
kill him when I get hold of him.
He said, you'll better go and talk to my mother. She's got a lot of stories to tell.
And I somehow feel even skilled interviewer David Callister didn't get all the stories in Cissy's long life. But let's go back to Inkerman Faragher and follow him from the end of his World War II service in the Merchant Navy into the political arena that occupied him for some 40 years.
After the war, Inkerman Faragher went to work as a baker and confectioner in London, and when he was there, he joined the Stepney Young Conservatives in the East End.
And I finished up as I was the vice chairman of North West London Conservatives.
In London at that time, the Communists had a party, didn't they? There was Labour, because Conservative and the others. Was fascism still there as well?
Mosley, Oswald Mosley. I come across them on 1 or 2 occasions holding meetings and that on the corners. I also was in the Albert Hall one afternoon to listen to Churchill speaking. That was absolutely amazing. The place was absolutely chock-a-block. I enjoyed it. Teaches her a lot.
Inkerman Faragher, and we're talking about his lifetime, and in particular now, when he returned from London to the Isle of Man and became a Douglas Town Councillor. Not at the first attempt, Inky.
The first attempt was 1965 in Derby Ward against the former councillor and member of the House of Keys, the late Charlie Burke. Charlie got 844 and I got 422.
But the amazing thing is that since 65, you've had 24 elections for the council. Yeah. On 9 or 10 occasions there you've been successful. On top of that, 3 unsuccessful House of Keys elections, 27 in all. I mean, you should be in the Guinness Book of Records, should you? Have you actually represented every ward of the town?
No. There are actually 6 wards in the borough of Douglas, and I have stood in 5 of them, and I've lost in all 5 of them, and I've won in 4 of them. The only one I never stood in was Victoria Ward.
When you went into the council, it was still the aldermanic bench were there, kind of ruling things, weren't they?
When I went in 1966, the aldermanic bench was there. The 24 members for the council, 6 up on the bench. And I can remember this to this very day, the first council meeting I went to. And the aldermen came in. They had morning suits on and top hats, and they were awesome looking crowd. I'm absolutely sure that they'd been issued with a horse whip each. They'd have used it.
When the aldermanic bench was disbanded altogether, were you glad that it went?
I wasn't glad it went, actually. It destroyed a lot of the history of the town. They could manipulate the vote, but once you got in and you got to know the procedure and you could follow it, there were ways of defeating them.
You were mayor for 1980-81. Was that a good year for you?
Yes, I enjoyed that year.
And as interesting as this conversation is, this is the most intriguing part.
It leaves one untold story that will have to wait until another day, on how and why Inky was subject to a severe censure over what he claimed were naughty goings-on at the Villa Marina.
And have we found that story in the archive room? We have not. We're still searching, but so far all we've found is Cissy O'Brien's unusual tip for skincare.
You were born in 1922.
Yes.
And there's not a wrinkle on your face, hardly. How was that?
Because my mother used to wipe my face with me nappy in the morning.
Did she?
A lot of Manx people did. Only if you wet it. If you just wet your nappy, you got your face washed.
Otherwise, you...
Otherwise, that was...
And that's definitely where we're going to leave that story. Today we've been in the Manx Radio archive room with David Callister, Inkerman Faragher and Ellen or Cissy O'Brien. And I'll have more memories from great characters of island life to share with you when we meet at the archive room door at the same time next week. But for now, let's turn off the lights and close the door. You can listen again to all the programmes in previous series of The Archive Room by subscribing for free to the Archive Room podcasts at manxradio.com or via your usual podcast provider. I'm Judith Lay, saying thank you for listening and wishing you a very good evening.
The nation state.